Hello, welcome to 6.7 and 6.8 extracellular components. So let's start talking about the parts of the cell that exist on the outside. We've spent a lot of time talking about what's on the inside. Let's talk about what's on the outside. So cell walls are characteristic of plants, of fungi, and of bacteria. They all have different types of cell walls, so we're going to today talk about plant cell walls. And if you remember from earlier biology classes, we talked about how plant cell walls were used to give the plant structure. So let's say humans have a skeleton that allow us to grow and give us structure. Well, plants don't have that skeleton, but they do have these cell walls. And they have these central vacuoles that allow and hold water. And when those central vacuoles fill up with water, they're going to expand. And these cell walls are going to keep the cell from exploding. So you can see that this animal cell doesn't have a cell wall, and when it takes in too much water, it can explode or it can burst. And so this plant cell is going to have cell walls, and therefore it's going to become turgid if it's got lots of water in it. And when a plant cell doesn't have lots of water, it becomes flaccid, or the plant becomes wilted. And so the plant walls are made from cellulose, and if you remember that cellulose is long, thin strands, microfibrils, all wound together to make a very strong molecule. And the cell wall is composed of a number of different things. However, the ground substance, the sort of matrix of the wall, is that cellulose. So I like to think of it as the dough in the chocolate chip cookie. So a young plant is going to have cells that are going to lay down a primary cell wall. So if this is the lipid bilayer, we have here moving outwards. So this would be the inside of the cell. This is the outside of the cell. So if we have our lipid bilayer, it's going to be a thin, flexible wall called the primary cell wall. So this is going to occur in a very young plant. And as the plant gets older, it's going to start putting down the secondary wall with more cellulose. And so this secondary wall, this is actually the stuff of the wood is made of, that trees create and wood is made out of. And so in between the cells, you have this outside layer called the middle lamella. It's filled with a molecule called pectin, which is a sticky polysaccharide. And so it sticks those cells together. So that middle lamella is going to be between the plant cells. And so outside of the cell wall, we have the extracellular matrix. Well, in an animal cell. So for a plant cell, the extracellular matrix is primarily that cell wall. For an animal cell, we have the ECM. We're going to say ECM for the ease of speaking. So the extracellular matrix, it's a matrix, which means there's a number of components all working together. So the primary ingredient is a glycoprotein or glycoproteins. There's a couple of them. And a glycoprotein, if we break down that word, glyco meaning sugar and protein meaning protein, so these are proteins with sugars. So the first glycoprotein that we're going to talk about is collagen. This makes up 25 to 40% of your body, so it is very prevalent in your body, and it is these long strands right here that you can see, and they exist all on the outside of your cells in that extracellular matrix. The next is fibronectin. And if you see this little connector here, this is fibronectin. You can see that it's touching the collagen, and it's also touching this protein, this surface protein. This is a receptor protein called an integrin. So it is going to transmit a message from the extracellular matrix. So if there's a stimulus coming from outside of the cell, it's going to impact the extracellular matrix. That's going to send the message down the fibronectin into the integrin, or to the receptor protein. So that integrin is the receptor protein. So this will cause a signal transduction pathway on the inside of the cell, or a a series of steps to make changes within the cell. Finally, we have proteoglycans. Proteoglycans are primarily, so they have a core of protein and then lots of carbohydrate chains. So you can see all of the carbohydrate chains coming off the side here. And you're going to have these in a network, hundreds of them, all sort of intertwined with one another, I guess creating a complex. They are going to be on the outside of the cell and are going to allow for transmission of information. So those are the components of the extracellular matrix. Let's talk about how cells can communicate in other ways besides the extracellular matrix. Let's once again talk about plant cells. So remember that the plant cells have cell walls. And so we know that cells work together as tissue towards a common function. And different types of tissue have to work together as an organ towards a common function. And so in order for these cells to work together as tissue, or for this tissue to work together as an organ, it has to be able to communicate. And in order for plant cells to communicate with one another, there are these gaps in between cells, so that actually there's a hole, even little holes or pores between even the cell wall, so from one cell to the other. And that allows for the cytosol, for RNA, for proteins, for different solutes to pass through from one cell to another so that the cells can work together and information can travel from one cell to another. So that's plant cells. Let's look at animal cells. There are 3 different junctions in animal cells. One is not used for communication. It's to make the cells adhere closely to one another, and these are called tight junctions. And so you can see the proteins going along the cell and how it's holding those cells closely together. And that's going to make it a watertight barrier. Those are important. Let's say when you're talking about skin, you don't want water passing through your skin. And your urinary bladder is filled with these tight junctions. You don't want the urine in your urinary bladder able to seep out. So you use these, so your cells have these tight junctions so that it is watertight. The next is an anchoring junction. I like to think of these as sort of like screws. The screw is an intermediate filament that starts in the cytosol and is going to pass through and out into the next cell, sort of anchoring it. The book gives an example of a rivet. It acts like a rivet. I think of it more of like a screw. It kind of holds it together. Same thing. And so that's an intermediate filament. We've learned about those already. And this is going to be found in muscle tissue. So your muscle cells are going to be anchored to other muscle cells. And so when you have a muscle tear, it's those ruptures of the desmosomes. And so finally we have gap junctions. Gap junctions are similar to plasmodesmata in plants. So you have these sort of holes or pores. And so you can see here there's a protein surrounding a pore or a pore space, and that's going to allow ions, small molecules, cytosol to pass through from one cell to another. This is going to be very important where there's lots of necessary cellular communication. For example, heart muscle, your heart cells need to interact with one another, and embryos, a developing embryo is going to need lots of different signals for this to start, this to start, this to start, all at different times or sometimes at the same time. So finally, here's our last slide. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Remember that life is greater than the sum of all of its parts. What we're studying is actually completely amazing. And if we look at this picture, we have a macrophage that has all of the parts. It has the pseudopod that is going to use the phagocytosis to take in bacteria. Those bacteria are going to be broken down by lysosomes and enzymes within those lysosomes, and those enzymes are going to be coded for in the genetic material. And if you have all of these things separate, let's say you have a pile of DNA and you have a pile of lysosomes and you have a pile of microfilaments, you have all of the pieces there, but when you have them all working together, there's something greater. And so life, remember, is the sum of all of its parts. There's a spark. There's something amazing about life. And it is what we are studying. So I hope this helps, and I hope you have a great day.